My name is David Rome. I'm a senior fellow here at the Garrison Institute, and I'm delighted to be sitting with Jean Houston, one of the leading spiritual teachers of our times and a frequent visitor to the Garrison Institute. We're so pleased that you can join us.
Well, thank you. Thank you, David. It's good to be with you today.
Could you briefly tell a little bit of your life story, where you come from and how you found your vocation?
Well, I suppose it's a kind of fractal. It would begin by the fact that I'm Scotch-Sicilian and a little bit of Cherokee. So hybrid mixture was there at the beginning. I went to 20 schools before I was 12 because my father wrote the Bob Hope Show. My father also wrote the joke, "Who's on first?" Although I think it was he and two Jewish guys when you look at the nature of the joke. And so we were always following Bob Hope or whoever was the comedian that Dad was writing for at the time. So I got to see America at the time before it got homogenized. I mean, if you were going to school in Biloxi, Mississippi one day and Bemidji, Minnesota the next, you were in radically different realities. So different realities became a kind of thematic, different cultures. I became, when I was about 15, the president of a very large high school with 5,000 girls. It was a huge number of people, with every possible ethnic and political and spiritual background.
Where were you at that
This
point?
was in New York.
Okay.
And Mrs. Roosevelt lived down the block, and she gathered us high school presidents and tried to get us interested in international affairs. And she took me aside one day and she said, "My dear, you know, I rather suspect you're going to have a most interesting life and career. But I want you to remember, my dear, that as a woman, you can expect to be trashed." She didn't quite use that word, but it was close to it. But remember, my dear, a woman is just like a tea bag. You put her in hot water and she just gets stronger. You know, something I found to be true. When I was about 21, and still in graduate school, I was invited by a government group to explore the effects of LSD on human personality. So I was very popular when I was 21 because I had the only legal supply of LSD, and studied the effects of this mind, whatever you want to call it, expanding or deepening, and had this extraordinary experience of being able to see what happens to the brain-mind system under very different kinds of reality conditions. So that gave me a first-hand look at the depths and structures of the mind.
And this is late 50s, early 60s?
No, this would be the 60s.
60s,
in the
yeah.
60s. And then when the research ended, my husband and I formed the Foundation for Mind Research and did non-drug studies of human potentials. And I already had a degree in religion, and I ultimately took a PhD in religious studies, spiritual studies, and another PhD in psychology. So it was to get them together. So we became, in our studies of human capacities and human development, we became among the early founders of the human potential movement,
yes.
You see. And so this then led to one thing. And Margaret Mead came along and said, "I need another daughter, so that's probably you," you know. And she lived with us off and on the last 6 years of her life. And she sent me all over the world. She said, "Jean, go out and harvest the human potential." So she sent me to many different cultures and gave me letters of introduction to study different tribal groups, indigenous groups, Balinese, among the Yoruba people. Why did these people have different kinds of capacities that you don't find in other cultures? And what I discovered, and then of course that led to United Nations work, and to this date I've worked in over 100 countries and probably intensively in about 40 cultures. So I was doing all this research on human development at home, and then I was all over the world studying the different cultural and social potentials. And that led eventually to actually joining them together and helping create a field that we call social artistry. And social artistry is human development in the light of social change and social challenge, because we live in the most difficult, challenging singularity in history. And what we do will really determine whether we grow or die. Now, so I working with the United Nations and other international agencies, working all over the world, especially helping leadership. Now, by leadership, I mean from several presidents of the United States to people who are the head, a man, for example, who's the head of his leper colony in south of Madurai in India. But really developing different kinds of skills. Most people, given education, given training, can learn to orchestrate many, many more potentials, sensory, physical potentials. And we pioneered a lot of the work that grew out of the Feldenkrais type of work, psychological, mythic, symbolic, which is my particular things, and spiritual potentials. And we find that by activating or helping people be introduced to this extraordinary realm of capacity that we all have but don't use, it really resulted in very different kinds of choices, applications, passionate possibilities that would not normally be used. So I still do that all over the world.
So I want to ask you a very simple question, which is, are you optimistic or pessimistic?
And my answer is going to be pure galloping chutzpah. And the reason I'm not despondent is because I work all over the world and I travel so much. And I see realities that the journalists either ignore or they don't put any attention on. As, for example, all over the world there are literally several, perhaps 3.5 million, I don't know the exact, but it's a huge number, volunteer organizations, grassroots organizations that have started up. Many of them have significant numbers of women. In fact, 70 to 80% are composed often of women of a certain age, who really are taking on a level of deep concern, passionate activity, calling the conferences, making things happen, having the genius of the follow-through. And that's something that the journalists do not look at.
Yes.
And so that you find an immense amount of awareness. Certainly the internet, which is sort of the prosthetic extension of the mind all over the world mind taking a walk with itself, so that we are aware of these issues and troubles. And unfortunately, we have the nature of the economics of media is to, activate our old fearful brain and make us focus on the terrible things. And of course, we're now having this interview at the time in which we're well into the British Petroleum oil spill. And I think things on that level, in terms of climate, in terms of ecology, unless we do some radical turnaround, they're going to get much worse. And I think that we're in for very hard times. I believe that you and I, David, have lived through the good times, and now we have to live in the great times, where we are being challenged to an order of human mutual care, experience, community, potential, active spiritual life, that in terms of even a democratization of greatness, that up to now we really have not had to have. It is a new world, a singularity that has never been there before. I mean, this is the most interesting and important time in human history. I realize other times in history thought they were it. They're wrong. This is it. This is it. So because of what I see, both in terms of the complexity of the challenge and the richness of the responsiveness that I see all over the world, I would say it's pretty balanced, and that's why I'm not despondent.
Wonderful. Thank you.
And also because of places like this. You can hear, noises in the hall, because this is a vibrant, active, this is a place for visionary activists, people who are deepening into the depths of who and what they are, tapping into the source root of their existence, and then coming back with ideas, with solutions, with teams, with partnerships to really go out there and make a difference. So if you hear all this movement in the back, that's all to the good. That's the world turning a corner.
So now you've given me an opening to ask you, since you teach all over the world, and but you have been teaching frequently here at the Garrison Institute. Is there some special quality here that you appreciate or that brings you back?
Well, it's very beautiful. We're right here on the Hudson, glorious environment. Things are done here with a quality of attention, presence, and mindfulness that you simply rarely find in other retreat centers. The food is exquisite. That's very important to me. You know, the beds are comfortable, the bathrooms are lovely, the space is spacious and filled with the energy of the fact of people really tapping into the depths of themselves. You can feel the fact of the community and the communion that has taken place here. And of course, as a Buddhist referenced retreat for some years, and before that it was another kind of religious center.
Yes.
But what I think is most remarkable here is the level of, as I said, of attention and attentiveness, karuna, awareness, and that pervades the entire place. Mm-hmm. So that allows the students to, what I've been teaching here is something I've been teaching for 27 years, my mystery school.
Yes.
A school in human development, human culture, spiritual explorations, and whatever I'm interested in at the time, you know. So that it is a wonderful place to explore, to deepen, to confer, to have plenty of space and areas of sacrality as well as areas of deep reflection. So it's a splendid place. I really know of, and I've been in most of them, I think. So, but I think it's really one of the finest in the world, no question.
Thank you so much for saying so. So I have a personal question.
Yes.
Or it comes out of something I was reading recently. But given your background in world cultures, in mythology, traditional cultures, what do you make of fundamentalism in the current world?
Whenever in history, and as a student of patterns of history, as I have been most of my life, you really find that whenever the world is up for change, whenever the world is in a state of whole system transition, or a culture is in a state of whole system transition, fundamentalisms always rise, always rise. And they rise because people are looking for grounding,
yes,
for some way of understanding and to be able to put into focus and meaning what is often situations for which they have been totally unprepared. And that's why I see that. You know, yesterday I went to the movies for a movie that has been essentially banned by the churches, especially the Catholic Church. It's a movie called Agora. And it's about Alexandria in the 4th century, 4th and 5th century. And Alexandria was the all-time liberal place at that time. It was the place of the great library, the lighthouse. It was a beacon for intellectual activity.
yes.
And its chief philosopher was a woman by the name of Hypatia. And Hypatia was a great philosopher and mathematician and cosmologist. And her minds just leaped all over me. And she was allowed to teach, even though she was a woman. A very brilliant teacher. And it shows the rise of the Christians who were suddenly being given carte blanche to do and be whatever they wanted to be. And they, wildly fundamentalist, and of course they killed her and they took over, and you really see these people turning into fiends, you know, and we can see why the traditional churches didn't want this movie. So it's only in 3 houses in America that won all sorts of awards in
Really?
Europe.
I hadn't even heard of it.
Yeah. Well, you see, that's it.
I would love to
well,
see
you'd
that.
have to go to New York. Well, yeah, you were in New York. You'd go to the Beacon Theater and you can see it. It's a very powerful film, beautifully made. Now, you know, I have been shot at. I have been denounced. I have run into, but what I find the way to really reach these people is to say, what do you really want?
Yes.
Open your heart. And often they want to talk about their children.
Yes.
And the education of their children. But when you come back to the fundamentals that precede fundamentalism, you really find that people are deeply worried, and especially for the continuity of things. Now, we can talk about the New Age, you know, And many New Age people are fairly fundamentalist themselves, and you find very similar things in terms of the rapturous experiences and the singing and the drumming and the healing and the belief in a very particular, often dogmatic way.
Right.
So it goes in all directions. America today, at least in terms of the Christian fundamentalism, has probably more fundamentalism than almost any country. I'm talking, you have Islamic fundamentalism too, but it's very interesting. But remember, if I may be so bold, America was settled by a whole lot of people who were fundamentalist, the old Calvinist forms, and now it's just beneath the surface crust of our consciousness all the time. But whenever, my main point is that whenever you have huge shifts in politics, in metaphysics, in science, in challenge, you're going to have fundamentalism. But you're also going to have, that itself is going to create the energy to literally new ways of being, thinking, exploring. And that's what's happening simultaneously. But the fundamentalists seem to be more interesting to the press than the other people. And they are outnumbered, they really are.
But do you see any positive quality in the sense that they are trying to preserve certain mythologies or a certain approach to mystery?
Yes, of course. That's a lovely question, the approach to mystery. Because we live in the middle of a great mystery, don't we? They talk about the argument from design that we were prepared for. And I would take a different slant on it, but I think of the improbabilities that we ever were at all. That if the universe, when it began, if the Big Bang or the Big Bounce is true, I know there's some speculation that may not be so, but if the hydrogen, atoms of these early different structures had not happened at the precise second and had been just right, if it had been one molecule off or one atom off, we wouldn't be at all. There are so many improbabilities that fill our entire reality. So I suspect myself that there's an enormous design. I suspect that the 15.8 billion year experiment, or 13.8 billion, I think that's the new line, 13.8 billion experiment that resulted in your life. When you look at all the improbable synchronicities that had to happen for you to come, apart from the fact that you and I won the ultimate Olympics, that a very particular sperm and a very particular egg really got together, it's extremely unlikely.
Yes.
And so we really have to say, that there is I think, a deeper meaning to everyone's existence. Part of my work is to help people discover that deeper purpose, and then help them find the energy, the belief. That's something I'm doing this weekend. The spiritual fortitude to really uncover what I'm calling now a second destiny. Since a lot of the people in this particular course are in their 40s, 50s, even 60s, they've done their primary destiny, the kind at which in the old days they would have died at the end of it, at 45, 55. But now they're going to go on for a long time. What do you do with this length of time that we have? I think you look at the higher destiny, the entelechy, the deep, divine, purposeful energy that is part of the universal intent that then, becomes coinciding with our higher intent and gives us the images of what we yet can be and will do. And I think this is something that you do here. And one of the main ways of finding that intent is deep meditation, reflection, forms of prayer, so that you can release the old stuff, the old atom, and get to the essential being. When you get to essence, then a very different kind of life unfolds, I believe.
Wonderful. Thank you. I don't want to keep you from dinner. Is there anything else that's on your mind just now?
What's on your mind?
Well, I told you about the fundamentalists. I just turned 64.
Oh, you're a young thing.
I'm a young thing. and how to serve my highest and best use. I'm still healthy, but I also am at a point where I recognize I'm not going to live forever, and maybe not even stay healthy for, certainly not indefinitely.
Well, with what you eat here,
yes, that's
I think
true.
you're going to do much better.
I have a lot of advantages, but when I was in my 20s, I got involved with Buddhism, studied with Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche. And so that's been kind of the through line of my life. And I'm no longer, I'm still connected with the Shambhala Buddhist community, but I'm not actively involved. So for me, it's very much about what I call mainstreaming contemplation, and how that can happen, how we can skillfully cultivate that, without being either too aggressive or too timid.
Well, old Chogyam Trungpa, he was anything but timid.
He was not timid.
And he was something of a wild man.
Yes.
The crazy wisdom, wasn't he?
Did you have any dealings
I knew
with
him.
Yeah?
Oh, yeah, I do. Yeah. I'm old enough to have, been present at the creation, practically, of a lot of these movements. So you're really asking about the unfolding of the next 10, 20, 30 years of your life, are you
Yes.
not? Yeah.
Yes.
And in your contemplations, do you not see things, feel things, have a sense of them? The synchrony of destiny, the patterns that are trying to emerge, do you draw them, do you paint them, do you dance them?
I don't do any of those
No,
things.
see, this is my big question for certain kinds of Buddhist practice. I really feel that since we are incorporated in these vast complexities of body-mind, that not only have so many sensory systems within and without, where creativity is just beneath the surface crust of consciousness and is going on all the time, where our psyche, we're polyphrenic in terms of our psyche.
Yes.
I mean, if we're not monophrenic, we have many different selves and persona, where the myths are roiling inside of us, wise old men, wise old ladies, death and resurrection, rites of passage, where the spiritual, the sheer spiritual vigor and the varieties are there within the treasure house of being. I think my own feeling is that to discover our higher purposes, we have to use these things, We need to use our inner imagery, which is often filled with marvelous, novelistic possibilities that are they're yearning to enter into space-time within each extraordinary vehicle that is each one of us. I think that the dance and the movement and the drum and the exaltation are part of our being. Otherwise, I think we bore God or whoever is out there, So what my advice would be is to cook on more burners and to use more of oneself in these naturally ecstatic manners. I have 2 puppies. This is a wonderful 8-year-old lady, but I have very young puppies. And they often are on their back, kicking their little legs, only their big legs, they're big dogs, in rapture.
Yes.
And it really reminds me of the sheer rapture of the universe. I think of the mystical experience as it was explored by Evelyn Underhill back in 1911 in a tremendous book, Mysticism, that first you wake up, oh, wow, it's here. And then in that extraordinary state of ecstatic awareness, you say, oh, I got all this old stuff to get rid of. And then there is that release, or that release and the purgation and the doing what you have to do to shine yourself up. And then, of course, there follows the illumination. You really begin to see the relationship of everything to everything else, followed by voices and visions, high-order creativity coming through your prepared vehicle, followed by after the voices and visions, you often then go into a deeper state, and you really get more spiritual resources and the deeper contemplative, followed by rapture and ecstasy, a natural form, followed by the dark night of the soul, because you can't look too closely at anything of your own. So you have to, the world has to become empty cardboard sets, while the deep world, regenerates, the regenesis. You realize you're a fetus of your higher self that then is coming to term, followed by the unitive form. I mean, all of these forms that we have is our natural psychodynamic, psycho-spiritual, psycho-cosmic experience. We are that great crossroads between cosmology and biology that is yearning to express itself in space and time. So we have to cook on more burners.
So let me, because I think I know that you are giving me advice. I'm a very verbal, conceptual person.
Yes.
Are you suggesting a form of creativity that is not
yes.
verbal,
Yeah, you
conceptual?
have to step out of your track.
Yes.
Because nothing exceeds or destroys like success.
Ah, I see.
We get into brain glitches. I mean, literally, real troughs
Yeah.
in the brain.
Mm-hmm.
It's a kind of addiction to one's excellence.
Mm-hmm.
And you say, I am this, I am that, and you may very well be, but you're also, nothing but is never true. It's always both and plus much, much more. So you go beyond your boundaries. I'm not just speaking, I'm speaking to all of us. I'm speaking to
Yes.
myself too,
Yes.
But I raise a vineyard. There's nothing more capital and labor intensive than a vineyard. And I literally pray over every, I have almost 5 acres in grapes.
Mm-hmm.
I just make all this wine for my friend. But to really be part of a process of nature, from the early greening and the taking care of the greening so that the bugs and the musk don't, all the way up to chasing the bears with the broom, because I have bears too, and they come and eat everything between 2 and 5 in the morning. And then the chasing away the bees, I always get stung, while you pick the grapes, and then I actually crush them by hand. And we don't stomp on them anymore. And then the fermentation and the casks and the months of waiting, and finally, when you get something that is the essence of pure becoming, and you've been part of it, When we get too far away from the natural processes, I think we lose our ignition. Mm-hmm. And finding the reignition by doing something that is natural, it can be aesthetic, it can be creative, it can be whatever it is very important to get us back into the great flow of becoming. You may know that I knew Teilhard de Chardin.
Right, yes.
Yes. And walked with him off and on between my 14th and actually it turns out my 17th year. And he would say that, oh, Jean, it is all the lure of becoming. Ah, the noosphere, the field of mind is coming upon us. Oh, Jean, the people of your time will be taking the tiller of the world.
Will be taking
the tiller of the world.
Uh-huh.
But they cannot go directly. You must touch every culture, every people. Touch it all.
Yes.
So.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
It would be delightful to continue, but probably this is a good place to stop.
Thank you, David. I've enjoyed it.